If you keep saying genocide, genocide, genocide over and over again, there will be people who will actually take the rhetoric to heart and believe that's what's happening. And so I think we've seen radicalizing. I think that's what you're pointing out, because the breadth of anti-Semitism, how broad it is, doesn't necessarily tell you how activating it is, how strong it will be, what will be the reaction. The breadth of it does have an impact when you mainstream the concept of genocide and you mainstream the idea that it is the Jewish state, it's the Jews that are doing it, and the Jews here are all allied with the Jewish state. So then, yes, then you end up having these terrible violent attacks.
I'm Scott Kahn, and this is the Orthodox Conundrum. This is the Orthodox Conundrum on JewishCoffeehouse.com. I'm Scott Kahn. Over the past month, 2 Israeli embassy staffers were gunned down in Washington, D.C. 15 people marching for the release of Hamas-held hostages were injured by a flame-throwing terrorist in Boulder, Colorado. And Zoran Mamdani, a candidate for mayor of New York who constantly disparages Israel and who refused to vote for a resolution condemning the Holocaust, has seen his poll numbers rise to the point that he has a real chance of winning the election. Anti-Semitism in the United States is getting worse. Anti-Semites are more emboldened than they have been in years to act violently based on their hatred of Jews. And anti-Semitic discourse has been mainstreamed such that it no longer disqualifies its purveyors. In order to talk about the new and frightening reality, I invited Rabbi Chaim Steinmetz and Andy Weiss to have a frank conversation with me about what is really happening, the problems with Zoran Mamdani, whether American Jews sense the urgency of the situation, and more. This is a bonus episode, and even though it is somewhat New York-centric, I think it's important for every Jew, as all of us need to be aware of the painful reality of the reemergence of anti-Semitism and the ways that it's manifest in the United States and elsewhere. We'll get to that conversation in a moment. First, remember to subscribe to the Orthodox Conundrum podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Please rate it and write a review. Continue the conversation on Facebook by joining the Orthodox Conundrum discussion group. Subscribe to my Substack, Orthodox Conundrum Commentary. Check out the link in the description of this podcast to get your free subscription today. Finally, in 2025, the best way to promote your organization, your business, or yourself is to create a high-quality podcast, and JCH Podcast Productions can help you make that happen. Whether you want to learn how to start your own podcast or want to improve the podcast you already produce, we will make it happen. Write to us at aliza@jewishcoffeehouse.com. That's ALIZA @jewishcoffeehouse.com. And let's get started with your high-quality, memorable, and effective podcast. Rabbi Chaim Steinmetz is the senior rabbi of Congregation Kilat Yeshurun on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. He has been a congregational rabbi for over 30 years and previously served pulpits in Montreal, Quebec, and Mount Vernon, New York. He has always been deeply engaged in community affairs and sits on multiple organizational boards. He is a founding board member of the Moral Hearts Alliance, which builds Jewish-Christian cooperation in support of Israel. He writes a weekly column for the Jewish Journal and has written for many other publications, including The Washington Post, The Daily News, The Globe and Mail, La Presse, Haaretz, and The Jerusalem Post. In October, Rabbi Steinmetz published his first book, Despite Everything, a chronicle of Jewish resilience in the aftermath of October 7th. Rabbi Steinmetz is married to Lisa Schwartz, and they have 4 children. Andy Weiss is a director at Gantry, the largest independently held commercial mortgage banking firm in the United States. A committed leader within New York's Jewish community, Andy chairs the AIPAC Real Estate Political Network. He has helped lead numerous organizations with community building, such as Chabad Young Professionals Upper East Side, where, among other efforts, he helped pioneer its Jewish business network. He has held leadership roles with the Council of Young Jewish Presidents, Israel Bonds, Jewish National Fund, Northeastern Hillel, and is an alumnus of UJA's Shapiro Family Fellowship. He, his wife Anita, and their 2 children are active members of the All New Synagogue and the Harmony Club. Rabbi Chaim Steinmetz and Andy Weiss, thank you for joining me today on the Orthodox Conundrum podcast.
Our pleasure.
Pleasure to be here.
We are recording this episode on Monday morning Eastern Time. We were supposed to record it yesterday, but as I explained on my hastily recorded podcast, that was postponed by Iranian missiles shot at Israel. And before we recorded, or before we planned on recording yesterday, I frankly asked you if you thought it was appropriate to have this conversation about anti-Semitism in the United States on a day when I assume most eyes or all eyes in the Jewish community are primarily focused on Israel and Iran, not on things like the mayoral primary in New York City. And you both told me that you thought it was right to move forward. So let me ask each of you, why not wait? What's the reason that it's important to talk about this right now? Rabbi Steinmetz, let's start with you.
Okay, I mean we are in the midst of an election in New York City that is the most consequential in recent history. Uh, Surging and perhaps even ahead in the polls is Zoran Mamdani. Mamdani is a 33-year-old who has very little experience. In terms of his politics, he has pie in the sky plans to the point where the New York Times said that his plans would bankrupt the city. In other words, it's free everything. It's no raise of rents and apartments, free subway, move the homeless into the subway because they need a place to live. It's all absurdities. But what has really galvanized the Jewish community is not so much his political stance, which is the political stance of the Democratic Socialists of America, but because Mamdani is about as anti-Zionist as one can be. When he was a university, he started a chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine, which is an organization that has been banned on multiple campuses because of its radicalism. Mamdani has condemned the Hezbollah pager attack that Israel engineered, which perhaps had the lowest percentage of civilian collateral damage in the history of military operations, and yet he found a way to condemn it. He has said he would arrest Prime Minister Netanyao if he comes to New York City. He is very clear that he is anti-Zionist. He doesn't believe that Israel should be a Jewish state. And the thought of this man being in control of the NYPD, when the NYPD is really what has protected students from encampments and ordinary Jews in New York City from these crazy rallies. I mean, I had a neighbor who was beaten during one of these crazy rallies just outside of our apartment building. Not like she went to the rally. She was outside watching them walk up the street. She came out with an Israeli flag to protest. They grabbed the flag and smashed her in the face and almost blinded her. So the thought of Mamdani being in control of the NYPD is absolutely chilling to our community.
Okay, and we will talk more about Mamdani as we go on. Andy, how about you? Why do you think it's important to talk about this particular issue on a day like today?
Well, I mean, I think Rabbi Steinmetz hit the nail on the head with why Mamdani is not qualified or fit to be a leader of our city. But particularly, I think what's troubling about him being elected potentially is what it signals to the anti-Semites in New York. And, I've lived here on the Upper East Side now for 12 and a half years. And I'm from New York originally. I'm 36. I never really felt anti-Semitism growing up in the New York area. Went to school in Boston, didn't feel it so much, never felt so threatened. And I would say since October 7th, I feel more tense when I walk outside. And I think to myself, should I be wearing a yarmulke sometimes on the Upper East Side of New York? I mean, listen, I don't think anyone anywhere should feel that, but especially walking on the streets of New York, which is the most populous Jewish city in the world, a Jew should not have to feel that. I felt it. There were protests. I live right by the Lowe's Hotel on 61st and Park, and Bibi was staying there, and there were Hamas protesters outside. Right, people calling for the death of Jews across the street, disrupting my day to day life. Right, that's one thing, but calling for the death of Jews. And I have two young kids, and my concern is more the statement of legitimacy to this view that's taking hold in the far left, that it's okay to be anti-Semitic under the guise of anti-Zionist.
Okay, we're going to get back to both points that you made about Mamdani and what it means for the rest of the people who are taking him seriously. I first want to divert, because I think it's necessary, into talking about the current war between Israel and Iran, but from the perspective of what it means about anti-Semitism. In terms of your own anecdotal experience in New York, have people generally been supportive of Israel in greater numbers than they would have been after October 7th or during the war in Gaza? Or does it divide along the same lines? I guess put differently, do you see much protest against Israel's action regarding Iran? Are people angry at Israel for doing this in the same way that so many people are furious at Israel for what they're doing in Gaza?
I mean, I personally haven't seen anything on the streets, right? Like there may be some protests. I'm just not aware of. I don't have any like interaction with that per se. I imagine there are plenty of people who would be willing to protest it and think it's the gravest human rights violation for Israel to be attacking Iran preemptively. But I personally just haven't seen that on the streets. I don't really go chasing protests. I try to stay in my apartment or in my office most of the time, or in shul. Yeah,
Right. I mean, the benefit of wearing a kippah all the time, by the way, is that you do hear what people have to say about being a Jew. Because if you're an identifiable Jew, people are comfortable coming over to you and saying things. And obviously, other Jews come over and they'll say "Am Yisrael Chai" or stuff like that. But there are non-Jews, and I know that other people have had this experience as well, where there are non-Jews who will come over to you and say "God bless Israel." Of course, you will be victimized by anti-Semites. I think, but what Andy is really pointing his finger at is that the big middle doesn't really care or get involved, and they kind of get dragged a little bit by the edges. And when the protesters against Israel are noisy and they are sort of taking up the main headspace of the city. So some people, more people may be drawn in that direction. Israel does have high negatives according to the Pew most recent Pew report, and that I think has to do with just how noisy the anti-Israel groups are. How you have Pierce Morgan every week talking about how Israel is killing babies and hiding that they're killing babies. So that has an effect on that sort of soft middle. The soft middle won't necessarily come over and say, "What are you doing in Israel? What are you doing in Gaza?" And the soft middle isn't going to come over and say, "God bless you people, we love you." But they can be dragged either way. And I think the noise around Gaza has dragged them in a negative direction. Not that they can't be pulled back, but it has had a negative effect on the soft middle in America.
Well, then, Rabbi Steinmetz, how about the Jewish people, though? Just concluding with the Iran issue, do you think that Jewish people have been proud of what's happening with Israel? Are they afraid about what's going on? Admittedly, it's only been a few days, but what's the general feeling, at least in your congregation?
So it depends. It's also very age dependent. I think for a lot of young Jews, uh, and I mean I know some. My kids are that age, as you know. I have some kids that age. Young Jews are proud of Israel. They're standing with Israel, but there is always a little bit of a two-step. Sometimes it's like, why is Bibi doing this? Or isn't it horrible that, Defense Minister Katz said this, or Smotrich, or Ben Gvir? They're living in a group that's hypercritical of Israel, and they know that some of the criticism is true, and that bothers them. Meaning, yes, Smotrich and Ben Gvir are walking Chilul Hashems. I mean, that's what they are. And so we need to call a spade a spade. And that affects even some of the young stalwarts. I think older people less so. I would say that we said this after October 7th. I think it's still very much true. The Jewish community has become much more strong or much more unified and has much stronger solidarity because of October 7th.
Okay, I want to get back to something, Andy, which you said a few minutes ago, talking about that protest at the Lowe's Hotel where Bibi was staying. And you heard people outside protesting him. And you said they're Hamas protesters, which means they're calling for the death of Jews. And let me say, I agree with you, but I'd like to know how you would answer people who would say people protesting Bibi are not calling for the death of Jews. They're calling for the end of Israeli aggression or whatever they want to call it. Why would you necessarily say the people protesting Bibi's visit are inherently calling for the death of Jews? That seems like a bridge, maybe a bridge too far for some people.
sure, sure. Well, I would say anyone who's outwardly supporting Hamas, whether in word or in garment, let's say, right? Or any other host of terrorist organizations, Hezbollah being another one. We've seen Hezbollah flags in New York City, right? These organizations are hell bent on killing Jews. Like that's plain and simple, right? But really, I think it comes down to just asking the question, why are these people so concerned about and this I think people kind of miss this sometimes. I look at this, I'm an accountant by background. I have a CPA, right? There's a concept in auditing where something on a financial statement is de minimis. Let's just put it out there, right? The conflict in Israel, while it is important to us and important to many people, right? It's a de minimis population in the world. There are 7 billion people in the world. There's 9 million people in Israel. Let's call it 16 million with the Palestinians. These are de minimis. Why is this taking up so much bandwidth? Why are these people spending their days going out and protesting the prime minister of Israel, who represents the same exact number of people as the mayor of New York City? To take it a step further, though, why are they not outside of the embassy from Iran or Pakistan or any other nation out in the world who's committing grave atrocities to far more people objectively? To me, and I think that really aligns with the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, right? The litmus test of are you singling out Israel amongst the nations for its supposed human rights violations? Yes, you are.
But wouldn't someone be able to answer you and say, that's just whataboutism? Meaning, if one country, and I agree with you, again, I'm playing devil's advocate here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
If one country is doing something that's wrong, and another country is also doing something that's wrong, the defense can't be, why are you protesting this country? You should protest that country too. That's whataboutism. So how would you answer that?
Again, not to say that what I'm saying here I don't think is valid, my initial point, but again, what are they protesting? The protest is, in my mind, factually unsound, right? We talk about a genocide. And again, let's just look at numbers again. We keep talking about a number of 50,000 innocent civilians who have died. How many months has it been 50,000? First off, the number is a disputed number, right? And of that number, any death, let's step back here, right? Any death period is tragic. Jewish, Palestinian, it doesn't matter your nationality. Human life is something sacrosanct. And that is what I believe our community as a broad whole values more than anything. And I'd argue as a people are amongst in the world amongst the leaders of pushing for the value of life. And that's historically true for our people. But what I'd say is that number just keeps getting thrown out like, oh, Israel's just targeting innocent civilians. It's like, how is this a genocide? Right? Like we're being portrayed as going out and trying to kill people. Like how is that even allowed? Right? How is that not called into question in the public light? It frustrates me, honestly, and I don't think there's enough that's being done to push back against that. It's like you keep saying 50,000 people. It's like you can only say, and again, not to trivialize death, right? But we're just talking about a raw number here. The number isn't growing. Where's the genocide? Where is the intentionality? If Israel wanted to commit a genocide, if Israel wanted to destroy the population in Gaza, it could have done it on October 8th, and we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Thank you. Okay, Rabbi Steinmetz, do you want to add anything to that in terms of, I guess we'll call it the line between anti-Zionism, anti-Bibi, and anti-Semitism?
Right. So, I mean, look, there's Sharansky's famous three, right? It's demonization, double standards, delegitimization. Let's start with delegitimization, saying, you don't believe Israel has the right to exist. Double standards, where your judgments of Israel are dramatically different than your judgment of any other country. Or as many have put it, there's a triple standard, which is Israel is judged at one level, Western democracies at another level, and countries or terror organizations like Hamas and the Islamic regime in Iran are not judged at all. And so, you have the double standards, and then you have demonization. I mean, so I think what Andy was saying is that very often, and these actors are very, very wise, they will use Bibi, who is a legitimate target of criticism. Just open up any Israeli newspaper. He is not, even with this war, which has turned out to be an exceptional triumph, Bibi will still lose the next election because, or well, we never know whether he'll lose it, but he'll still be behind in the polls because he's terribly unpopular. But the wisdom of some of these, or the cleverness of some of these anti-Israel groups is that they'll use Bibi as an open door to really delegitimize the entire state of Israel.
Until now, we've been talking about the presence of anti-Semitism slash anti-Zionism in the past 20 months in general, but I'd like to ask if it's deteriorating even further. In particular, we can look at two recent events, which obviously everyone listening already knows about. On May 21st, Elias Rodriguez of Chicago shot and killed two embassy staffers from the Israeli embassy, Sarah Milgram and Yaron Lashinsky. Frankly, he may not even realize they were part of the embassy. He was shooting at two people who were in a Jewish museum in Washington, a museum that talked about Washington Jewish life. It wasn't even about Israel. And he was obviously equating Jews with free Palestine, as he called out afterwards. And then more recently, there was an Egyptian man in Boulder, Colorado on June 1st who injured 15 people with a homemade flamethrower of some sorts. Also, when they were marching for the release of Israeli hostages or hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. And distressingly, we have heard people not only not condemn this, but even defend it and say, well, this is what happens when you have a terrible country like Israel. This is an appropriate response to that sort of thing. So I'd like to ask you, Rabbi Steinmetz, do you think that things are getting worse? Or is this just an example, happens to be two things happened recently, and things are kind of stable in terms of where anti-Semitism is now in the United States?
Well, there's two measures, obviously. And I would add also in the attack on the governor's mansion in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, on Josh Shapiro's governor's mansion.
On the Seder night.
There are two measures, right? There's the depth, meaning how deep is that anti-Semitism? In other words, to be willing to go out and in that terrible, terrible murder in Washington. I mean, he tracked them both down and then shot them several additional times in the back. I mean, that is a rather horrific but profoundly anti-Semitic act. In other words, how deep is the anti-Semitism, so to speak, and how broad is it? This sort of anti-Semitic, anti-Israel discourse is finding new places to land. I mean, it is taken over the far left and now is really starting to crop up in parts of MAGA land. I mean, Tucker Carlson is a perfect example of this, where he immediately is like, "Oh, this Israel is dragging America into another war," which is not going to happen actually. And so you have more anti-Semitism happening. I would say it's in ideological corners. So it probably is a broader phenomenon, but I think the real worry is that it's gotten radicalized. That there are, if you keep talking about anti-Semitism, look, if you keep talking about a genocide over and over again, and newspapers endorse the genocide canard, and the New York Times, I remember, had at the very beginning, this is the very beginning of the Gaza war, had an op-ed writer who wrote an article saying that she endorses the genocide claim, which is an absurdity. But if you keep saying genocide, genocide, genocide over and over again, and I can talk about the genocide thing because it's a really hurtful claim. The genocide, 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 there will be people who will actually take the rhetoric to heart and believe that's what's happening. And so I think we've seen radicalizing. I mean, I think that's what you're pointing out. Because the breadth of anti-Semitism, how broad it is, doesn't necessarily tell you how activating it is, how strong it will be, what will be the reaction. But it is, the breadth of it does have an impact when, in other words, you mainstream the concept of genocide, and you mainstream the idea that it is the Jewish state, it's the Jews that are doing it, and the Jews here are all allied with the Jewish state. So then, yes, then you end up having these terrible violent attacks.
I think that you just look at the physical manifestation, right? It's anti-Semitism, right? It's the number of hate crimes against Jews per capita is higher than any other people in America, and it's rising. So you have a high number, and the velocity of it is increasing. People going outside of Chabad headquarters protesting. It's like, what does the Chabad Lubavitch movement have anything to do with the government of the state of Israel? Nothing. Just Jews out there trying to be happy, spread light in the world, and you have people harassing them. It's not right. But I think that the one of the big issues as well right now is that and again, it goes back to my initial point around what's potentially troubling outside of Mr. Mamdani's lack of just credible leadership for New York City, just justifying the fact that there's a DSA candidate, the DSA supported, right, or at least a faction of the DSA endorsed the killing of the embassy workers in DC, right, which is absolutely ridiculous. These people, their ideology is fringe, but it's getting more and more legitimized. And you look at these campus protests, the campus infiltration has been going on for years, but now we're seeing more and more physical manifestations of it. And this is years of professors who are feeding anti-Israel, colonialist narratives, Israel, the colonial empire, tied to America. We, in essence, are part of this like white guilt, which is somewhat hilarious from a Jewish perspective. It's like we're guilty of privilege, being kicked out of every country for the last 2,000 years. And the narrative around the state of Israel is just totally morphed on college campuses. And it's worrisome that as it gets more and more legitimized, to Rabbi Steinmetz's point earlier, those people in the middle, they start to question the narrative, maybe, right? What is accepted as like common thought? That to me is really the like one of the main things that scares me and is I think is very troublesome, especially in a city like New York where we have a lot of universities. You see kids getting harassed at Baruch, at Hunter College, not always as newsworthy maybe as Columbia or NYU, but there are plenty of college kids on other campuses in the city. Hillel's being berated by this rhetoric, and it's not right. Like these kids are just trying to go get educated. As should everyone there. Just go in, get educated, get out, be a productive member of society.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I mean, I think that's something we have to really reflect on. You're trying, Scott, to connect the dots, right? You want to say, okay, Mamdani mayor, what does that mean for anti-Semitism? And so I'll say it. When you have a mayor who believes that Israel is perpetrating a genocide, and there are others who, and that now becomes, so to speak, the narrative, the legitimate story, because it's the mayor of the largest city in the United States who's saying that. So then everything else moves up a notch, right? In other words, he may be talking, he'll say, oh, I'm only talking about international politics. And there may be others who say, no, we're only protesting Israel. But then, because it's the Jewish state, I mean, that's the thing about anti-Zionism. Aside from the fact that it is so close to anti-Semitism, it immediately opens the door for it on just on the edge. And people who are brought into anti-Zionism very often sweep right over to anti-Semitism. So you have the mayor of the largest city in the United States who believes that Israel is perpetrating a genocide. You'll have at the other end, it'll pull everything over, and at the other end, there'll be more anti-Semites because they're just going to say, well, this is correct. Israel is horrible. The Jews who are also members of the Jewish state, so to speak, they're horrible too.
Yeah, and I'd also just add to that as well, right? I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and I very much respect her views, and she was saying there's a difference between what, like even what I was saying before about the litmus test, right? Some people who are anti-Zionist, let's say, right, because they believe in the crap that's being fed to them by the let's just call it, all right, the Iranian and the Russian propaganda. They believe that they may not be anti-Semites. She gave an example, AOC. AOC is likely not an anti-Semite. She may be misguided, and I may think that her economic views are totally ludicrous and terrible for our city here, let alone America. But let's say she's not anti-Semitic, but again, the problem is it's emboldening the anti-Semites and allowing these false narratives and the propaganda to spread. It just becomes more and more ingrained, and the more you tell a lie, the more it's believable. Listen, I haven't studied in depth the lead up to the Holocaust, but my understanding is that's how it ultimately happened. That's how you could spread this narrative around, oh, Jews are, I mean, it's the protocol developers of Zion, right? At its fundamental core, you're just spreading these canards about Jews controlling the world, controlling influence in politics and media. The irony being we're fighting against Qatari and Russian and Iranian propaganda and control and them vying for all these politicians and our media. Like that's the underlying irony that I think is probably lost on all of these anti-Zionists.
It's a Jewish conspiracy, and yet Qatar is the one that's putting together the conspiracy. So it's
right. So I have a couple comments to make, and then we'll move on to Mamdani in more detail. The first one is based on what you said before, Rabbi Steinmetz, and you talked about genocide, repeating that word. The first is just an observation that the more you repeat that word, almost by definition, you've now changed the frame of reference, meaning it's either genocide or the alternative is not genocide, but by implication, still very bad. Usually you don't have it's a genocide versus what do you mean? Israel is avoiding civilian casualties more than any army in the history of urban warfare. That gap is not usually there. It's genocide or less than genocide. So you've already lost the game by having it there.
right.
That's my first point. The second one is I think sometimes even when people don't talk about genocide, let's say they're not part of the genocide crowd. And I've seen people who are respectable reporters talk about how Bibi has done enough revenge, using that word. Aside from feeding into an old Christian canard about the Jewish people, Jewish vengeance, leaving that aside, simply talking about this war as an act of revenge misses what's actually going on. And repetition of terms like that, saying, oh, it's revenge. They're not saying genocide, but it's revenge, already is, again, changing the frame of reference of what exactly is this war? It's to get back. It's to somehow make up for October 7th as opposed to preventing it ever happening again or getting rid of the perpetrators so they can't do it again. And I think that's an important point. And finally, the last point I'll make, stating the obvious, is that there remains an irony, and I can't help but mention this. And this gets back to the question that you mentioned before about Jews controlling Hollywood, Jews controlling the media. And to me, the real difference is, well, Jews do control some things, but do the Jews control it? And when someone says the Jews, it implies that there is a cabal, to use the term that's often used. Jews as a group are somehow responsible for each other in this negative way, that we're all somehow in cahoots to run the world. If you say that Jews run a particular business, if they're Jewish, there's nothing inherently anti-Semitic about that if it's not said in a pejorative way. If you say Jews own this particular business, and they do, well, but if you say the Jews own it, now you're saying that it's something else. And in that sense, when we see anti-Semites going after Jews in America because of what Jews in Israel are supposedly doing to the Palestinians, whereas the people who are going against those Jews ostensibly believe the Jews should never colonize Palestine, so to speak, which means that the Jews in America are the good guys because they're the ones who didn't colonize Palestine. And yet it doesn't matter because we're working with the Jews, if that makes any sense.
Well, no, anti-Semitism never makes sense. That's the whole point, Scott.
Right.
It's not necessarily a rational reaction. It's a way of the person sort of identifying themselves by just focusing on the Jew and being the exact opposite of what they consider to be good.
Rabbi Sachs calls it the original conspiracy theory.
Yeah, it's quite something. I mean, the genocide thing also is painful. I mean, there have been studies. I forget the name of the person who did this study recently, but the word genocide has been applied almost exclusively to the state of Israel in the last 15 years. That is the usage of it in media is always with the state of Israel, which is a form of Holocaust inversion. It's basically taking a word that was invented for the Holocaust, then taken and now used against the Jews. It's really quite awful.
I'd like to move on to Zoran Mamdani, the candidate for mayor or for the Democratic primary, running primarily against Cuomo. Originally, people thought Cuomo would win in a cakewalk and then face Ernie Adams, as I understand it, as a non-New Yorker. And now it looks like there's a good chance that Mamdani could actually walk away or at least emerge victorious somehow or another in the Democratic primary and then would face Adams, who's an independent, in the general election. I'd like to ask about Mamdani's positions because you mentioned some before, some of the things that he says. They're both those positions that have to do with anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. I understand that he actually voted against a resolution in the New York State Assembly, an annual, almost ceremonial vote to condemn the Holocaust. And he apparently voted or didn't vote for that or voted against it. And his spokesman, who had a Jewish name, I should say, said, no, that's because he was too busy campaigning. But as I understand it, then someone pointed out he also didn't vote for it in 2024, to which the spokesperson had no answer. Can you confirm or deny that? Tell me what happened.
He didn't vote for it 2 years in a row. He later clarified that he didn't. He was distressed by some of the language in it. Look, it just tells you what we're dealing with here. You're right. Anything recognizing the Holocaust is also considered to be unacceptable in certain spaces because that too strengthens the Jewish case for a state of Israel. It's certainly not the reason for the state of Israel, but we all know that had there been a state of Israel, there would have been far fewer Jews who would have died in the Holocaust. And that is, of course, the unspoken understanding that the world realizes even more profoundly after the Holocaust how important the state of Israel is. So these are people who are trying to hide the Holocaust or turn it into something else, repurpose it because they understand that this is part of the Jewish case for a state of Israel.
What are his chances of actually winning? And I don't mean just the primary, but the actual election. Do either of you have any particular information there?
I like going with poly markets. I don't know about you, Andy. I like the people who bet on it are the ones that I like to listen to.
Put their money where their mouth is.
Right today, I think it was 42 cents to bet on Mamdani and 58 on Cuomo. That's pretty close. I
Too
think
close
it's
for
even
comfort.
a little bit better than Trump got in the national election.
From my understanding, there's a few things. One is I think that the Jewish voting bloc, call it in New York, if they show up, can help make sure that Cuomo wins, right? Because I think it's was it 600,000 registered Jewish Democrats in the city of New York is what I've been told. And so Jews showing up to vote. Let's assume 500,000 of those registered Democratic Jews are not anti-Zionist conservatively. Let's assume there, right? So, and I think 900,000 people voted in the Democratic primary last mayor's election. So that's a big voting block. We need people to show up and vote, and I think all of our communities have really been active in pushing people to go vote. Whether it's a shul, whether it's just informal WhatsApp groups, people across different communities and sub communities within the broader Jewish community, I think are really paying attention and going to vote because they recognize the significance. So, hopefully Cuomo will win the primary, but my understanding is that even if he does win the primary, Mamdani will likely still be on the ballot in the election in November because he'll be representing working family parties, the WFP. So it's not to say that this election is the end all. And frankly, if Cuomo doesn't win, it's the same thing. He'll likely be on the ballot as well. But regardless of the outcome on June 24th, there's still a chance that Mamdani, if he loses, could still be the mayor of New York. So we need to remain vigilant. And I think this should, though, there's a lot of, I've spoken to a lot of people. I've been telling people to, register. And, as an individual, I'm telling people I'm voting Cuomo. You should vote Cuomo. We got to make sure that Mamdani does not win. But a lot of people I know are Democrats, but a lot of people I know are Republicans. And I've been telling them, hey, listen, you need to change your registration going forward because this is not the end of this fight. And we need to make our voices heard in the local elections here. And, the Democratic primary is the election in most cases for most positions that anyone living in our districts is voting for. These are primary determinative races. So, I think to the extent that all of us right here, and anyone listening uh, can do it. Encourage people who live in New York, Jews, anyone really, to register as a Democrat, regardless of your political affiliation. You can vote for whoever you want in a primary. I mean, in a general election. You don't want to vote for a Democrat? Great, go vote for a Republican in the general election, but make your voice heard in the primary.
Right. I look, I tell people, Andy, that your party affiliation is not a religious identity. You can be a complete Republican and still be registered as a Democrat just so you could vote in the Democratic primary. You can tell everyone, in my heart, I'm a Republican. I just have to register as a Democrat because I live in New York City. And by the way, there are many other people like you, and they will feel that way. We did do a major campaign in February, which is just too far away from elections to get independents and Republicans to re-register as Democrats. Andy, I'll actually tell you that there's a ton of people who are independents, people who like, I don't want to be part of a political party. I don't like parties. I don't like the politics. And we have to sort of push them also. We did succeed with a couple of hundred re-registrations, and every vote counts. But right now, early voting is going on right now. It goes on through Sunday, which is the 22nd, and then and then of course you can vote on election day, which is the 24th. This is something we need to not only go out and vote, we need to get every single one of our friends to vote. We need to tell everybody. It doesn't matter if you stand online. I think this is a seismic shift in the way the community has been thinking, because until now you could be apathetic about politics. If you didn't want to go vote because it just takes too much time, you didn't have to. And now you have to. And it's not a problem that you can solve by giving money. I gave money to the candidate. Well, guess what? Money doesn't buy the election. What will actually control the election is if you go out and vote. And if you have to stay online for 2 hours and vote, you need to do it because New York City needs you and our community needs you.
Okay, I want to ask Andy about some of Mamdani's positions that don't have to do with Israel or the Jewish people,
Sure.
because I know that a lot of people who are non-communists are bothered by his very left-wing positions. Could you talk a little bit about what he represents, even apart from the Jewish community, things that some people might find troubling?
Sure. Well, I work in real estate. I broker commercial mortgages. So I'll speak to one that's close to home, and I think there are a lot of landlords in New York City who feel this. He wants to do a rent freeze on rent stabilized apartments. Now, if we back up to 2019, the state assembly and the Senate, the Senate flipped in 2019 or 2018. Democrat. It was historically Republican, and that opened the way for the state legislature to basically enact a new law. I don't know if it. I don't remember if it was they repealed the law that allowed for destabilizing of rent stabilized units, right? But effectively, they shut off the state shut off the mechanism to allow landlords to recoup their investment in renovating rent stabilized apartments. And the result of that is thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of units are being sidelined. They're being warehoused because there's no incentive for landlords to renovate their units because they can't raise rents. There used to be a formula so a landlord could recoup in like 3.5, 4 years, let's say, what their investment would be into their unit. They were cost money to renovate a unit, 30, 50, $75,000 to gut $100,000 in some cases to gut renovate a unit. And some of these units haven't been touched in 30, 40, 50, 60 years, right? People live in these for years. And so not allowing landlords to recoup investment, forget about profit here, right? Just recoup a pure investment, disincentivizes people from fixing housing stock and building new housing stock. It's just simple economics. If you lower the supply of housing, the cost of housing will go up. Putting a rent freeze and not allowing rent stabilized landlords to increase their rents and recoup the cost it takes to run a building. Energy is increasing, insurance is increasing, property taxes are increasing. So these landlords are losing money on these buildings. Many of these landlords are not just big bad boy landlords who are kicking out tenants, right? Like that everyone likes to portray landlord. A lot of these landlords who own these buildings, they own one, two, three, four buildings. They're immigrant families. They've saved their money, they invested them, and the city has in essence confiscated their wealth that they've accumulated because the values of these buildings have been decimated. A lot of them, their loans are being taken over. Their loans are underwater, and the bank is taking over. I think the DSA, right, and these socialists and communists, as you mentioned, they like to portray that they're for the people, but the people are having their property confiscated, and people are not living in better housing. And let's just even step back one step further here. Rent stabilization is not affordable housing. There are plenty of people who make hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, that live in rent stabilized units that are, in essence, assets passed down from generation to generation. And the city just allows it. The housing system here needs to be reformed. Putting a freeze on rents does not make New York City more affordable. It will make New York City less affordable and will decrease the housing stock here and will make, on average, the housing stock worse quality. None of what he's proposing to do is going to benefit everyday New Yorkers.
I've also heard about something, and maybe you could explain this, city owned grocery stores or something like that. Could you explain what that particular policy is?
I am not so in tune with it. My understanding from a layman's perspective would be the city operating a business, which you want the city to operate your local corner grocery.
Yeah, they have difficulty operating the city.
Yeah, and oh, like by fiat, goods are going to be cheaper because New York City's operating it. No, someone eats that burden and forget about eating the whatever increased margin, from your goods versus, as a percent of the price you deem to set for a loaf of bread or a gallon of milk, right? Think about the administrative burden on the city of New York, how many people you would need to employ to oversee and manage every single local corner store. Like, what kind of nonsense is that? Let's let the city deal with citywide important issues. How about we tackle the homeless problem in New York? Get people who are living on the street real help. Let's get them off the street in a humane way. Like, that's what we need to be talking about. People want a safe and clean place to live. They want to go to work. That's what most people want. We just want a safe community so that we can go about our day and not have to worry, am I going to get shoved onto a subway platform? I don't think that he is hitting on anything remotely close to what will help achieve that.
I'd like to actually go back, Rabbi Steinmetz, to the anti-Semitism issue vis-a-vis Mamdani. What Andy's talking about right now are actual policies that the mayor can affect. I don't remember the story exactly, but it was about 25 years ago. Giuliani was the mayor, and he made some very, very pro-Israel comment, maybe about arresting somebody from Iran, I don't know what, at the UN. And it was probably someone, a spokesperson for the Clinton administration, said something sarcastic along the lines of that we don't get involved in the foreign policy of New York City. And my question really is this. When we're talking about Mamdani, when he talks about anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, okay, when it comes to grocery stores, subways, and rent, the mayor has some power. But when it comes to Israel, what actually can he do? It's bad for someone to have that bully pulpit, but I'd like to know what's the fear vis-a-vis anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism and anti-Israel activity where the mayor does have an effect such that people who are worried about that issue should care about who the mayor is?
Well, the most important is the one that he constantly talks about, is that he would arrest Bibi Netanyahu if he came to New York City. And when questioned about it, saying, isn't that the purview of the State Department? His answer is, no, but we'll show the leadership, we'll show the national scene how they should be doing things. I mean, obviously, there is the bully pulpit. There are areas in which he can cause pressure, especially if he's in charge of the NYPD, which has a large investigative arm. If he wants to start cracking down on charities, where there can be an allegation that they're passing money, let's say, to the Israeli army, which would be illegal. You can do that, and you can stymie, you can completely make miserable a bunch of charities. I mean, once you have the NYPD at your disposal, you can create a lot of trouble. He can remove protection for Israeli diplomats if that's what he would choose to do. He could make them unwelcome. So there are certainly areas in which he could have an impact within the city, particularly for Jews who want to support Israel. He can have an enormous impact on them. I would just add, because I was listening to Andy talk earlier, and I have a line that I repeat to everyone I meet in politics, in which I say, if you're anti-Israel, that is a litmus test on crazy, because people like Mamdani, not only are they anti-Israel, not only do they want rent to be free and groceries to be free, but they believe in defunding the police. Let's go into the most dangerous neighborhoods and take the police out, and we'll send in social workers instead. And that will bring peace on earth, which, it's a credible vision for after Mashiach comes. But until then, one has to live. And the thing about this is I like to emphasize, and perhaps Scott, particularly for your listeners in Israel, they need to know this. When Mayor Adams was elected, he also won his race against someone who was pretty much pro DSA. And the people who supported him most, the people most frightened by defunding the police, were the Black and Hispanic community. They were the communities who put Mayor Adams in office because they said, we can't have a defunding of the police. And if Cuomo wins, it will be because of the Jewish community, but it will be because of the Black and Hispanic communities, because those are the communities who know how important it is to have police protection, to have safety and security. And that, like I said, Mamdani believes in getting rid of Israel, and being anti-Israel again is that litmus test on crazy. So you can get rid of the police as well.
Let me ask you to be a prophet for a moment. If Mamdani wins, what do you think will happen to the Jewish community in New York? Do you think there'll be a mass exodus? Do you think there'll just be problems, but people will stick around? What would be your prediction, Rabbi Steinmetz, and then Andy?
I think that there will be people who will probably leave because of other reasons, because of taxation policies. I don't, I, he'll make us miserable, but the people who leave will leave because of crime, because of taxation, because of clean streets. It's going to be very similar to the end of de Blasio during COVID when we lost a lot of people. COVID was one catalyst, but de Blasio, frankly, and his incompetence was also another catalyst. So what will affect us will just be our people leaving. Our community will be miserable, but we've been miserable at other points in our history and plugged through. And we'll wait for 4 years from now to get another shot at it because we don't quit. We keep going even if it's difficult.
What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, listen, I would say I largely agree with everything Rabbi Steinmetz is saying, and I guess my hope would be, and hopefully we don't need Mamdani to win, is that more Jewish New Yorkers wake up to the reality of the rising threat of the DSA and the far left in our city. It's a national problem as well, but it's really pertinent here in New York, and New York sets the tone for the rest of the country, I would say, in a lot of ways. I don't think that there's going to be a mass exodus of Jewish New Yorkers or an entrenched group here, and I don't think there's wholesale shooting of Jews on the street. That's not what would happen. Him being elected is problematic in the largest part because of what I think it represents and what he represents and the message it sends. Yes, Rabbi Steinmetz hit on certain areas where he could be problematic, arresting Benjamin Netanyahu, right, the sitting prime minister of Israel, which is an absurd notion, alluding back to my earlier point around any other world leader. He's not calling for the arrest of any other world leader that's coming to the UN. There are a long list of leaders here who frequent New York City who should be arrested,
Yeah.
but are not.
Actual criminals.
Yes,
Yes.
actual war criminals. Look no further than the Muslim countries of the Middle East at the tops of the list, mind you, the actual ethno states that expel Jews entirely from their populations who have lived there for 2,000 years in many cases. I think that it will be problematic for our community, but I think that we'll persevere here. I'm confident that New York is a place for Jewish people for the long term.
Okay, but Andy, let me ask you something. I want to know how much this really does speak about what people are thinking and how much of it is sort of that big middle of people who don't really care about the Jews one way or the other, positive or negative, and they simply don't like Cuomo. How much is this because Mamdani represents an authentically new DSA / anti-Semitic / anti-Zionist way of thinking? And how much is it that Andrew Cuomo is a very problematic and scandal-plagued candidate, and if Mamdani were running against a much better candidate, let's say, then we wouldn't be seeing this, and therefore wouldn't be saying the same thing about the people who are willing to accept him.
Yeah, I mean, listen, that's a reasonable point to make. A lot of people have their misgivings and their reservations about voting for Cuomo, but there's no nuance in the history book. No one's thinking to themselves, "Oh yeah, like he only won because of." It's like, no, it's a signal. That's really the problem, and that's why, regardless of any of our own personal feelings, we have to go out, in my view at least, and go vote for Andrew Cuomo and tell as many people as possible to put aside their personal feelings, because it's a binary situation. You either rank Andrew Cuomo number one, or you run the risk of Zoran Mamdani becoming the mayor of New York and a DSA candidate taking hold of this city.
As I tell everyone, when you have a choice between bad and worse, you choose bad. That's just the rule. You don't just say, "Oh, I can't choose." You have to choose bad when you're given a choice between bad and worse.
Let me ask a final question to both of you, with which we'll conclude. Do you think that New Yorkers in particular and Americans in general lack a sense of urgency in terms of what's going on? We talked about the rise of anti-Semitism. We talked about the deepening of it, as you said before. It's not just that it's broader, but that now it's expressing itself in violence more than before. Do you think that most people, most Jewish Americans, are aware of the problem, or do most have their heads in the sand, or something in between? Andy?
It's hard to know, because I feel like we're all in our own echo chambers, and we're in our little silos within a broader community. And so it's hard to know, oh, do most Jewish Americans feel this way? I think there's a lot of Jewish Americans who are scared. I think, unfortunately, there are, or at least to me, it seems like there are still far too many that have their heads in the sand and support Mamdani. I don't know what numbers do, but enough do that are helping to push him. But I think that most Jewish Americans recognize that there's a rise in anti-Semitism. It's an objective fact. The New York Times just reported on it in an editorial. And I think more and more people post 10/7 who historically were not super engaged in politics and kind of just, they're Jewish, but they went on with their lives. They weren't paying attention to this. I think that as a trend, more people are paying attention. More people want to be engaged now, and I'm hoping that people show up and really vote in this election, especially the Jewish New Yorkers here.
Okay, Rabbi Steinmetz, let's conclude with you.
I think that actually that's what's driven so many unaffiliated Americans to come back and to be part of the community, is that everyone here is in shock by the anti-Semitism. They saw it on the streets on October 8th. They saw it at the encampments. I think that there are many Jews at work who are uncomfortable talking about it. I have a friend a member of our community who just moved offices, and his new office doesn't have that many Jews, and he's sort of concerned about, like, okay, well, how do I, so to speak, come out as a Jew? Because people feel uncomfortable being Jewish now in certain spaces. So this American Jews are very wide awake right now. There's no slumber in the American Jewish community.
I hope that awareness that people now have does translate into votes and into people going to the polls, such that somebody like Zoran Mamdani cannot be elected as the mayor of New York, and hopefully send a message to people that those opinions that he represents and that he advocates are not acceptable to enough people such that he cannot be elected. I appreciate both of you joining me today, Andy Weiss, Rabbi Chaim Steinmetz. Thank you. Subscribe to the Orthodox Conundrum podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and please rate it and write a review. Please visit jewishcoffeehouse.com for other episodes of the Orthodox Conundrum, as well as many other great podcasts, including Intimate Judaism, The Maimonides Minute, Chochmat Nashim, The Francisca Show, and Let My People Eat. I'd appreciate it if you go to Apple Podcasts and rate and review the Orthodox Conundrum. It takes literally 2 minutes. It's just giving a certain number of stars and writing 1 or 2 sentences. Please like the Orthodox Conundrum podcast on Facebook and join our growing Facebook group, the Orthodox Conundrum Discussion Group, where you can feel free to discuss issues in Orthodoxy in an honest and friendly environment. Finally, do you have a message that needs to get out? Do you want to promote your business, your organization, or your cause? The best way is by producing a podcast, and Jewish Coffee House can make it happen. I have experience producing hundreds of podcasts, both for myself and for satisfied clients. Whether you want to learn everything you need in one day, or relax and record and let me do the heavy lifting, Jewish Coffee House Productions will work with you to make it happen and make it even better than you imagined. Let me help you today. Write to me at scott@jewishcoffeehouse.com or go to jewishcoffeehouse.com, click on Productions, and sign up for a free consultation. Make your voice heard, promote your cause, sell your product, and engage an audience now. I'm Scott Kahn. This has been the Orthodox Conundrum on jewishcoffeehouse.com.